come once again to discuss things.
Some Kevin Smith. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen, and we're currently doing Jesus and His Super Friends.
Jesus and His Amazing Friends.
Jesus and His Amazing Friends. My bad. Yeah, so we're talking about Dogma, which is a Kevin Smith film from the View Askew universe. I love that. It came out in 1999. It stars Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Chris Rock, Alan Rickman, Alanis Morissette. Jason Lee shows up in this, plays the villain. It's a pretty. I think this might be, at least for the time, I think this was his biggest cast. I think Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is probably bigger, and he might have done a couple other things after that, because he did like the Cop Out with Tracy Morgan and Bruce Willis, and that was crazy. But yes, it's a pretty sizable cast for when it came out. This is a film that deals with religion, hence the name Dogma, in particular Catholicism and just ideas surrounding Christianity. And like a lot of things, it's very formative for me on my thoughts and like just general opinions on religion, without being like a one-to-one. It's just something that I saw at an age, and it kind of left an impact and gave me a lot to think about, and I look back on it now and it's kind of quaint. I guess the thing that stuck with me the most on this viewing was I never really remembered the foreword all that much, which starts with the definition of, what was it? Was it an appeal or something like that? And it's just, it goes on, and Kevin Smith talks about how you're not meant to take this movie too seriously. It's just a work of comedy. And I'm like, that's definitely a cop-out, because it's not just a work of comedy. There's some meat to sink your teeth into in this one. But you definitely shouldn't take this movie as blasphemy either. It's very tongue-in-cheek with everything that it's doing. But it's making some points along the way, and I don't know, I definitely took it as kind of just Kevin Smith's take on Catholicism, having grown up Catholic, and his, at least at the time, his views on religion, and where he kind of stood on things. It was an interesting little film to watch in that regard. Have either of you seen this movie before?
I saw it when I was in high school, I think. I would have been maybe 14 or 15 when I've seen it, but I literally have not seen it since then. So it's been... Wow, it's actually been over 10 years since I've seen this movie, yeah.
Probably me too, yeah. Alfie?
It's something I haven't seen, but I've heard a lot about, because I was a very big fan of Kevin Smith's Batman podcast, but I didn't know anything outside of like his general filmography. But just in terms of like listening to someone talk about stuff, he gets brought up a lot. So I always kind of vaguely knew the idea, but no, this was my first watch.
Okay. Alfie, since this was your first time through, this was your cherry buster, what did you think of this?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was a funny little romp that had some good scenes, and had some good things to say about it, but didn't ever go to the line of trying to take itself too seriously or make it preachy. It very much felt like a kid who had grown up in a religious environment, who had made all of these jokes, but also all of these questions, finally just kind of get out of their system, like just fully put it out, kind of in the same way as Scorsese did with Last Temptation of Christ. Just it seems like when you're a filmmaker who's like deeply grown up in a religious environment, you need to at least make one film that's just that, just to get it out of your system because it's so ingrained. So I think that's something interesting about the development of it. But I thought the cast was all great. Um, I think the dialogue is clearly the strength of the film, and I think a wise choice as well. Because despite how big the cast is, I don't think this is a very high budget or anything. I think it's a good choice to make a lot of the arcs and a lot of the things that happen are just two people in a room having a conversation, or will the other characters like in the back. And I think it's fun. It is something that I think because of the runtime, like, and this isn't a long movie, but it is something where as we get closer to the end, we kind of fall off a little bit because we've kind of played all the tricks. But I never found myself not enjoying it. So yeah, I had a good time with it.
And Steve, I know I've talked. You've kind of flip flopped on me over the years, Steve, because I know when we first started talking, you weren't a fan of Kevin Smith movies, and then like there was a period where you kind of came around on them a little bit, and now I think you're back to not liking them very much. What were your thoughts on this one?
I thought it was all right. I remember the first time I saw this, initially I thought it was really good. I do things where I'll get obsessed with someone and I'll just like read or watch or look at everything they've ever done. So like there'll have been a year where I've like watched every movie from like Martin Scorsese or something. And there was a year in high school where I like got obsessed with Kevin Smith and I just watched everything Kevin Smith ever did. And usually the reason for me to do that is either I know I'm going to like it, or I've been told it's good for so long that I feel like I should watch it and know and like it. I had that experience with Mission Impossible, where everyone and their mother will always tell me like, "Oh, the Mission Impossible movies progressively become the greatest action movies of all time," and so I've sat down and watched all of them through to kind of say like, "Okay, what's the reason? Why are these the greatest action movies of all time?" And I'll come away by the end of watching all of them thinking that was all right, it was bland. I don't really understand the hype. And that's my experience with Kevin Smith, because I think Kevin Smith exists in a very specific sort of like cultural zeitgeist in the late 90s and early 2000s, where I think he made a positive impact on a lot of people and had a sort of like budgeting geekdom that was important for a lot of people. But I caught that wind, I think, when it was just way too late for me to care. Like, I was already just a massive nerd and a massive geek, really into like obscure geeky things, and I never even really heard of Kevin Smith by that point. So when he does his Kevin Smithy things, it just goes over my head and I just don't care. And so, and I think that's why the only Kevin Smith movie I like at all is Jersey Girl, because I think Jersey Girl is a legitimately fun, sincere romantic comedy. And all of his other movies just kind of feel like just a bunch of kids from my high school got together with a camera and make a movie, which is almost literally what they are.
Especially since you're originally from New Jersey.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, that's literally what this is. And so, like, it didn't appeal to me because I just didn't want to see that. I didn't need that. And so Dogma, I feel like this should have been, like, the one Kevin Smith movie, even over Jersey Girl. Like, I feel like if you know me and you know Kevin Smith, you would think the one Kevin Smith movie I would really like is Dogma, the one that's all about, like, philosophy and religion and stuff. And it's got the same problem I have with all of his movies, which is just, it's really dull to me. I don't find it particularly funny. I think it makes some, like, interesting points about religion that are worth talking about, but I don't particularly register it as a thoughtful movie. Not to get too sidetracked with more tangents of other things. It's like The Matrix to me, where like everyone and their mother talk about like how The Matrix is this movie about philosophy, and it's like this really rich allegory for philosophy and philosophers and different kinds of experiences, yada yada yada. And I don't care. Like I've never approached The Matrix in any way, shape, or form for its like quote unquote rich philosophy, even though there's an entire body of literature on it. It feels like it's a movie about that, and therefore it almost isn't to me. And that's sort of what Dogma becomes to me, where like it's a movie about Dogma. And so I don't know. I don't care. I didn't grow up in a religious household that was deeply Christian. None of the experiences kind of latch onto me. And so all of my understanding and criticism of religion is like literally taught in an academic setting. And so like I sit here now, 27, watching this movie, and I'm just like, well, this is fine and dandy, but these are all questions I know have been answered 200 years ago by other people. And so I don't get invested.
No, I think I understand that. And I think what Dogma represents is kind of like baby's first theology, you know? There's a lot of interesting ideas and stuff. And I think, you know, all due respect to Smith, I'm not entirely sure he's read that stuff, you know? So when he's sitting there talking about these things through his characters in this movie, and he's bringing these things up, these are legitimate questions himself and other religious people have wrestled with, and I genuinely think you're getting what, to a degree, it's always hard with a writer to attribute how much of this should we take as this is what they think, or how much of it is this is what their characters think. But I think he is legitimately trying to provide some kind of exposition, some kind of explanation, some kind of answer to those kind of struggles and questions.
Like, and I mean, I don't mean to come off elitist in that way. Like, this is absolutely a Kevin Smith is talking about his ideas and experiences from a religion perspective. And I think no matter what someone thinks of Kevin Smith, the one thing they can say with consistency is that he made all of his movies from the perspective and from the interests he had as a filmmaker, and he almost never sold out in his early filmmaking. I mean, compared to what he does now, where he's just like shilling for DC and Marvel for whenever they do stuff. But like, to his credit, in the early 90s and in the late 90s, early 2000s, he's just an actualized person who will only do the shit he's interested in. And that's totally cool, and that's totally respectable. But because none of these things are things I engaged with from that early childhood perspective, they go over my head, you know? Like, and I was watching your guys' episode on The Last Temptation of Christ, and there would be legitimate points where you guys would like say things about the Bible or Jesus or just like Christianity, and I didn't understand what was happening because I have no religious context in that way whatsoever. So like,
You're a heathen.
you'll drop religious references and jokes, and I'll just be like, I don't get it. And that's what this movie is to me in a lot of ways. So I'm like, I don't get it. My entire understanding of Christianity comes from when I was in college studying religion.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. So it's definitely not like a universal movie. I just wanted to get that out because, like, I do find the theological discussions in here very interesting. Theology was never the thing I spent a ton of time on because I was also going through my edgy radical atheism phase, and when it was time to discuss theology in philosophy classes and stuff, and I never really took too much study of it outside of that. But it's a grouping of ideas. It's a mindset that I legitimately do find interesting, and it's interesting to see it explored through someone else. And I think the trappings of setting it all around Catholic dogma and making the plot like the funny thing to me about this is the plot of this movie. The angels have found a loophole within Catholic dogma to get back into heaven and thus contradict God. And you can't do that. That's a really interesting premise for a film. Like, Dan Brown, eat your goddamn heart out, because it's so much better than the fucking Da Vinci Code. It's also more epic, so that helps. But yeah, I don't know. I legitimately like some of the stuff going on in that regard.
I will say that's the one thing that I'm like, this is legitimately hilarious to me, where you think about like the history of new atheism and like the Logic Bros and stuff, and the idea that the entire kingdom of heaven and reality would collapse because there is a contradiction that's happening is really fun to me.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, I don't know. So there's a lot I like about this, and then this is one of the movies where, like, I think this is the least funny of Kevin Smith's movies. Like, there's still gags and jokes in it, but like this is the one that has I feel the fewest of those, and it just gets kind of wrapped up in the philosophical discussions and shit. But there's also like more subtle jokes that I really really enjoy in this, like Loki and Bartleby are banished from heaven and forced to live out all eternity on Earth in Wisconsin. And that's just some like truly Old Testament level God shit right there. I gotta tell you. I mean, really, like, what would you choose, Steve? Hell or Wisconsin?
The DMV.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
Oof, rough. Yeah. Alfie, how about you? And you've been quiet. What are some more of your thoughts? Why don't you take us in a direction? What do you want to talk about, Alfie?
Like Steve's point about like the perception, because I think that's something that a lot of filmmakers who talk about like Western views of religion and faith with Christianity and Catholicism is they don't even seem to kind of have the perspective that this is something that an audience who is not grown up in that environment won't like. The in joke isn't there, and I think that can be something with like geeky communities as well, but it's always fascinating. I don't even think that is like a negative term. I just think that's interesting of like when you're making something deeply personal as a result of that, you're excluding people, and often that can be a benefit because I think it was like David Lynch who was saying like if you pick a movie and the studio makes it for everyone, they've just sucked the life out of it because then it's for no one. So I think that's something interesting where growing up with half of my family being very deeply Irish Catholic, it's always kind of like the thing of like you just pick up terms, you just pick up things, even if they're again the history of my family is not one of deep religiously people who actually follow the tenets of religion, but yeah, they still go to church and all that. So it's kind of the things I think you take for granted, just like, oh well, I know this just from surroundings, so of course other people will know this and will get a thing from that. So I think it's interesting that this film is both very casual in how it talks about it, but also there's a lot of exposition. I think is maybe an attempt to catch people up to, because again, it's not even up to speed with the actual text, it's just up to speed with Kevin Smith's new mythology that he's adding to the stuff. But it's like a lot of scene of where a character is introduced, the next scene is just that character explaining their deal, and other characters comment on it. I think that's an interesting way to, because it's not even like a crux at that point because it happens every time, so it's just the movie. Like so much of this movie's runtime is characters explaining a thing that it's not necessarily a fool, it's just this is what they're trying to do. They have to be aware that's what it is. So I think that's interesting. That Steve, was that something where you would have been more on board with it if we just kind of took everything as a gimme and just treated this with pure irreverence where like just characters just carry on going, or was the attempt at least of just most of this just being dialogue talking about the thing something you liked or just took you out of it?
That's interesting because you say that and it computes in my brain. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right, everyone does just kind of explain their deal to me. But I think I was always just so lost as far as like the Christian mythology that I didn't realize I needed explanations, and so every time I got one, I'm like, okay, cool, thank God, now we can keep going. Because I didn't understand what was happening half of the time.
It's that initial confusion means that every subsequent attempt is just a write-off, because that initial wall to climb is so high, it doesn't matter after that certain point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the one scene that I think was a really good bit of exposition is when Alan Rickman first shows up and he's in the bedroom, and I think the gag with like with her trying to like put out the fire, and then him just kind of like snarkily talking to her and making jokes about getting laid. I think like as far as like dick and fart joke Kevin Smith humor goes, I think that's some of the funnier bits. And I think the exposition he gives is actually like legitimately well put in there, and I think Alan Rickman delivers it really well, and I enjoyed that. But now that you say that, like, you're right. Like, every character in this movie is kind of just a character to explain their character before they kind of disappear. Like, Serendipity shows up, and her entire reason to show up is to explain things to you, and then disappears. And Rufus is kind of the same way, where, like, almost all of his scenes, except, like, 2, are him just explaining things to people. And Kevin Smith and Bruce Willis don't get along, in part because Bruce Willis says that Kevin Smith is, like, quote-unquote not a real filmmaker. Like, he would complain about how Kevin Smith doesn't, like, actually understand how filmmaking works. And Kevin Smith would bite back and say, well, yeah, I don't, because I dropped out of film school and I don't care about all the technical things and all of that. But you watch his movies with that in mind, and you realize that it's not an endearing quality sometimes. Sometimes it's just legitimately you don't know how a movie should work. And so you end up with a movie that's like 90% exposition. Except in my case, I didn't register it that way because I needed the exposition every time it showed up.
See, I guess I'd push back on that a little bit, because I think that, and Kevin Smith has talked about this, where the one thing he's good at is dialogue. And I think, though it is very exposition heavy, he works the exposition into the dialogue fairly well. Like, you know, putting Bethany in here as this completely fish out of water character that is, she's Catholic, but she's not versed in Catholicism. She's not a know-it-all. So she needs a lot of this explained to her, and then you kind of get to a point in the movie where you're like, well, why her then? And, like, really right around the time that you're seriously questioning why this girl, you get your explanation, and I found it relatively satisfying. I, like, on this watch through, I definitely noticed more how much of this movie is dependent on explaining what the characters' deals are. But I don't think that's, like, by mistake. I think it's because he's trying to say different things with different ones. Like, Alan Rickman could have just stayed with the group the whole time. It could have been Alan Rickman, Jay and Silent Bob, and Bethany. But Rufus is introduced to talk about a different idea. And Serendipity is introduced to talk about a different idea. Like, all of these characters do serve unique purposes outside of just being there to explain what's going on in the plot. And even what's his name? Jason Lee's character, Azrael. Even he serves a purpose to not just move the plot along from, like, the villain orchestrating things standpoint, but he talks about and explains certain ideas from a more negative perspective. He serves as kind of the doubter.
Yeah, and I think that's where the meat of the film is, and, like, where the stuff is worth talking about, where every character from Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Jason Lee, and Alan Rickman, I think, and then even, like, Salma Hayek's Serendipity, I think they all have interesting things that they represent through the thing that they're explaining that they are. So, like, what Serendipity is as the muse is an interesting concept that's baked into her dialogue explaining what she is. And that's totally worth talking about. Though, real quick, I just want to backtrack a little bit and say Bethany is introduced as the fish out of water who has Kevin Smith's new mythology explained to her. I think maybe the crux of my disconnect is she's confused because she has a working understanding of Catholicism that's being broken. And I don't have a working understanding of Catholicism. So I don't understand what she's confused about because I'm confused about entirely different things.
I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, like, how much of it is new, because...
Well, so perfect example, right? Where, like, Alan Rickman's talking about... It's something. He's talking about, like, how he's, like, a choir angel or something.
The highest choir of angels.
Yeah,
yes.
Something like that. He says that, and then she keeps dropping, like, religious metaphors or references on her. And then she mentions something about, like, Egypt, and then Alan Rickman gets, like, really snippy. It's like, oh, you remember that part. And I'm like, I didn't get it because I didn't know what she meant.
Ten Commandments.
Is that all? Was it just the Charlton Heston movie Ten Commandments? Is that all she was joking about?
Yeah, no, literally, they even say, "Oh, it's not a Charlton Heston movie." Like they literally make that joke.
Well, no, but see, I get the Charlton Heston joke, but like I didn't understand what she said. Is what I mean. Like I didn't understand her joke was a Ten Commandments joke.
Well, she's joking about the whole plagues of Egypt that the idea of the Charlton Heston movie is about. Because she says, if I'm remembering the line correctly, like she knows shit. She's like, oh, the plagues. Oh yeah, make a Charlton Heston movie and suddenly it's worth knowing is the kind of thing. And like, the plagues she's referencing are the plagues of Egypt, which is a thing you know about, like just culturally. But it's in particular, Alan Rickman brings up Ten Commandments, Charlton Heston. Like that's the thing she's referencing there.
If I could jump in for a second.
Go for it.
What I think is interesting about this is because I think Steve, you're absolutely right in like what it actually the thing is, and I do think you're right in the case of that it's not genuinely how you're supposed to make a film. Like if this was like if I had to like grade it, right, I would say like every character who's introduced has to give exposition structurally that's very played out and very like you should be doing something different. Not every character should be that, but like throwing away all that bullshit is I agree that it really doesn't. You make a film however the fuck you want to make a film. Just put it on like the same way you can write a story, especially where this isn't Kevin Smith's first film. They've already had some films under their belt when they made this. You're a filmmaker. Like, you've made it doesn't necessarily mean you're a good one or a great one or a revelatory one, but, like, the rules and the systems of how you do these things kind of go out the window once you're actually on the job writing things and the things you have to make. There's no playbook to story writing, despite how much we wish there was, because then it would make sense and I wouldn't have writer's block and all that stuff. So I think the fact that that is what the story is and that is what the thing is something that does play to Kevin Smith's strengths and makes this a better film than if it was trying to use characters a little bit more uniquely, because I don't think that's where the strengths of Smith lie. So that part I'm here for, and I enjoy the vibe of the film. The thing that was interesting about the conversation you and Ian were just having is that I think Kevin, this is an example of a Twitter thread or like comic discussion or something where we geeks take for granted that, oh yeah, of course everyone knows this issue, this back issue, this issue, thing like this. But this is what happens when that fanboy mindset is applied to religion. It's you could absolutely retake this entire script and just work it into like the New Gods. Make this a New Gods film where it's all about Highfather and Darkseid and Mr. Miracle and Enigmata, and all of these conversations are just about the main character is someone who has read like the Jeff Johns New 52 Darkseid War, and then Alan Rickman, who is playing Light Ray, has to explain that no, this is what Jack Kirby was doing. Like that is exactly what this movie is, but just for the actual Bible.
And see, I'm with you there, right? Like, we want to have conversations about the theology of the New Gods. I am with you, but like the second it's about the Bible, I got nothing.
But that's what I mean, though, Steve. Is because that's, I think, a very good example of how audiences can be alienated no matter what you do, just on the sheer principle. A lot of comic book fans have this with like the Legion of Superheroes or something, where it doesn't matter how good it. Just the moment you say it, people just switch off. There's no thing, and I think a lot of religious movies don't really take into account that people have that reaction to religion. So I think that's the case of this film and you, which is just fascinating to me because it goes into like, again, Ian, when you talked about like, oh yeah, the Ten Commandments and like the plague, I was like, yeah, that's like, I'm shocked that Steve doesn't know that. But then again, like, of course Steve doesn't know that because like that is something it is in pop culture, but it's in a very kind of, I don't know, just like a pre-assumed segment there. There's like an assumption kind of that. Of course, everyone generally knows that, and we do that a lot, and we're surprised what people don't know. So I don't know. I think that's very interesting to me. I don't have a larger point. It's just I'm interested by it, you know.
No, that's fair. Like I'm not trying to downplay it or anything. I'm just like, well, if you know Ten Commandments, that's the reference. It's not like deeper than that. And I think that was kind of the gag, is like she really only gets like the broad strokes. She doesn't like get, when he says the highest choir of angels, like he's talking about all these like particular things that are outlined in the weird parts of the Bible that no one talks about anymore. Whereas she's kind of, you're just modern person who, like, she's a Christian, but she doesn't really know more than like the very basics, because and that's kind of the point of the film in some regards, is that like crisis of faith, that lack of or questioning of faith, and everything that's going around that, because she has that conversation a couple times of when she was a kid, she used to just be like, she felt like the presence of the Lord. She felt loved by God. She felt religious. And that's something I kind of relate to. I don't know, like, if that really translates, but like that's something I kind of relate to, because when you're a kid, you have that because you kind of get wrapped up in the pageantry of church and the excitement of the way families talk about it, like you get like the praying at night and stuff, and so you just, like all kids do, you just take things at face value and like, well, if everyone else is doing this, then it must be the case. Then when you get older and you start thinking for yourself and start like actually questioning these things, it's harder to feel that way innately. You have to try to feel that way, and it's hard to try. So I thought that was just a very interesting way to characterize her, where she's religious, but she's not religious. She just has a religion. And so she doesn't really know much more than you do. Because, Steve, if you know, like, the basic stories of the Bible, your Adam and Eve, your Noah, your plagues, your Jesus crucifixion, then you've got basically all the context that she does going into this, but just not the context of, oh God, I hate how I feel about religion these days. Like, as far as the Christian mythology that she's aware of, you've pretty much, like, just as a general living in this culture and seeing it referenced in other places, even if you haven't seen the films that adapt some of those stories, you've got the general gist of what she's going off of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fair. It's just, I guess it's just, again, a matter of, I am so not the audience for this movie that it's hard for me to, like, consider that one way or the other, But maybe, to part of your point, I want to talk about Ben Affleck, because
Sure.
I like Ben Affleck, and I like him in this movie a lot. His speech in the parking lot to Matt Damon, where he's like, the humans get a choice with free will whether or not they believe, but because they're angels, they don't. And so being away from him literally creates a longing in him that he can't ignore. That's really interesting and really sadistic.
Yeah, angels are weird, man.
Apparently.
I really like the new trend that's going around of the biblically accurate angel decorations for Christmas trees. That's really fun. Because it, like, what angels have become visualized as in popular media is very different than how they are described in the Bible and the Old Testament in particular. And there's just shit in the Old Testament that's like, it's not touched on in this movie, but it's not touched on anywhere outside of the Noah movie. There's shit with angels where, like, I shit you not, Old Testament, there is like a whole thing about angels coming down to Earth, falling in love with human women, having sex with them, and producing superhero babies. Like, I 100% that's in there. And God didn't like it and decreed that angels can't have sex with humans. And Kevin Smith literalizes that with the Ken doll thing. So like there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on with angels, but yeah, that's the thing is they're created to just be there for God. They're created as like God's first little curiosity, which I think Smith plays some interesting stuff with the idea of like, well, just having something that knows and having something that believes and like literally worships the ground you walk on because that's all they know to do. That's all they can do in the presence of the Lord would be very dissatisfying and just would not be like comfortable if you want to like apply humanity to God in that respect of just like angels are cult members essentially in a way. And so you kind of get the appeal of creating humanity who can choose to love you because that way you know it's real. I just thought that was kind of an interesting ass premise. Also want to talk about real quick how since we're talking about angels, I want to talk about Azrael and how Kevin Smith 110% plagiarized Gaiman and Alan Moore's Hell from DC.
Oh, absolutely.
It gets even worse because there's a deleted scene where like he 100% says evil's an abstract. Hell just used to be a place where it was just awful to be separated from God. And then the first humans showed up and it was like, no, please punish me. 100% plagiarized it.
Absolutely. Because by the time this movie was coming out, he was already writing comics. Like, and this dude grew up on that shit. He absolutely stole that from Gaiman on purpose.
Mm-hmm. And it's fine. It's cool. I like that interpretation of hell being out there. The more general populace that knows about it, the happier I am. But I found that really interesting too.
The one gag with the angels that really worked for me was the opening scene of the movie with Matt Damon, where he's arguing with the nun and like just goes into all of these like really bad like reasons for why God and religion are a scam, and then she loses her faith and goes away, and then he sits down to Ben Affleck and you realize they're angels, and he's like, you literally have spoken to God. Why are you doing this?
That's a good one. Yeah,
it's really funny.
It's so good because like I feel the movie puts itself into a pretty good faith kind of position at that point because literally the argument that Matt Damon makes there is like that's that top tier new atheist argument. You know what? I'm curious about something. We're gonna go on a Geeky Gentleman adventure to YouTube real quick. All right. Dogma, Loki, Nun. Let's see here. Yep, Dogma, opening scene, Loki and the Nun. All right, before I scroll down, how many YouTube comments are going to be, oh, he 100% gets it. This is on point. New atheist talking about how this is like such a logical breakdown of religion.
I'm going to bet at least 5 out of the top 10.
Alfie, what are you thinking?
I mean, it's like, you can't count that many. How many views does the video have? If it's over 1 million, then it's going to be a lot.
Yeah, it's over 1 million.
Alright, and it's going to be a lot.
Clip's been uploaded since 2009. Here we go. Yep. Alright. Damon and Affleck work so well together. Absolutely great in this movie. Surprised? Alright. I love that Matt Damon plays Loki here and then pops up in Thor Ragnarok playing Loki. Huh. I hadn't noticed that. That's a good point. Always loved the, oh, not you. Who sent the paper? Well, I don't know. I guess not.
His faith in humanity restored.
Yeah.
Wow. You know,
Yeah.
I guess maybe it's a thing of like the people who have seen this movie probably grew out of it or like came away with something different than new atheism. Because it's not a very new atheist movie except for like scenes where it's making fun of that.
Yeah, but I think that scene, that opening scene, does a pretty good job of creating good faith because it gives the most like poorly understanding religion atheist argument that you can, and then immediately says, okay, so we're not doing that. I think that's a really, really good choice. And then a lot of the movie is actually, I think, pretty good criticism of modern religion. Like, not the Catholic Church in particular, but like a lot of churches start to do stuff where they try to like make Christ more appealing by not actually talking about the Bible, which is really funny. But like, I remember reading this Lutheran book where like a guy left his New Age Christian church because they were teaching kids the sacrament, and they called the wine juice. And so this guy's daughter went to go drink the wine because she thought it was just juice and it was okay. And that pissed him off because it wasn't taking religion seriously enough at that point. And like this, I think, does a good job of that, particularly with like the Buddy Christ moment. And like that is probably the most marketable image from this movie. It's like on the DVD cover. He sold Buddy Christ figures, probably made a good chunk of money off of that one. And it's good stuff.
I love the absolute coup of having George Carlin be the dude at the church.
Oh, that's so good.
It's so fucking funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of good gags like that. Like, again, Chris Rock. This is before Chris Rock started like actually acting. So it's kind of cool to see him in here, and he gets to play Rufus the Black Apostle.
I love how Chris Rock has gone from early career $10 million budget Dogma as a 14th apostle to the now modern career highs of checks notes Spiral, the Book of Saw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man, that's an upgrade.
Actually, it's interesting because Chris Rock like started doing Broadway for a little bit. In the early, in the early 2010s, he actually like really started taking acting more seriously. Because like when he's in movies like this, he's mostly just like doing his like kind of stand-up stage persona. He's not really acting, you know. And so I don't know. I'll have to check out Spiral, see how he is in that, because I think that's his first movie, at least in a major role for quite a while. I don't know, it's weird because Chris Rock also was in a movie about haha, black president, wouldn't that be funny? And he kind of looks back on that and was like, shouldn't have done that one. But yeah, there's some interesting gags and deeper pulls in here that I thought were pretty good.
I think the other thing about Kevin Smith movies that I appreciate is that Kevin Smith definitely falls into that category of the actor's director. Ryan Johnson's like this now, Tarantino's like this. The kind of director that it doesn't matter whether or not you like the actors involved in anything else. When they work with this person, they're on their A game, and they almost always do something memorable or something that's maybe a deeper pull for them. And so you got people that are like just, you know, inherently talented, like Alan Rickman doing a really good job as everything, or George Carlin, who's always doing well. But I'm not a Matt Damon fan. I like maybe like 2 movies Matt Damon's ever been in, and he's really, really good in this. But I also think Ben Affleck is an interesting one because Ben Affleck and Kevin Smith have been friends for a really long time, then they stopped being friends. And I am legitimately a Ben Affleck fan. Like one of my biggest problems with the extended DC universe is that it completely derailed Ben Affleck's directing career because all 3 movies he's directed are some of my favorite movies, and I just wish he got to do more of that. And I usually, even if it's in a movie I don't like, I think Ben Affleck's a pretty good actor that has some range and some talent. And I think he does a legitimately good job in this movie. I like the way he delivers his speech a lot, but he also just nails that dialogue that just sounds like conversation you're having at like the comic book store. Because I think you see that a lot, especially post Joss Whedon, where everyone's trying to have like the, you know, tripping over yourselves and your sentences trail on and you make awkward jokes and stuff. Like everyone tries to make like quote unquote realistic dialogue by making it like intentionally kind of pointless dialogue. But Ben Affleck, I think in general, delivers all of his lines with sort of like a natural snarkiness that just sounds real. Like, I feel like he talks like a genuine person every time he's reading a line, even if it's something like deep and exaggerated, like all of his beliefs about God in the parking lot scene. But like when he's just like on a tirade, he just sounds like a dude, and I think he does that really well. Definitely better than Matt Damon, who I think like his dialogue delivery tends to be very one note. He's really good in this, but I think he does kind of just have a voice. And you put him in next to Affleck, and I think you can really see the difference in Affleck being able to actually deliver this kind of dialogue naturally.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair assessment. Matt Damon's, I think, more the creative than Affleck was at least at this point. But I don't know. That's like a whole other topic of conversation. Let's talk about Steve's favorite part. And Alfie, I'm gonna make you talk about this first because you too quiet. What'd you think of the shit demon?
You could cut it out. You didn't need it.
You'd cut out the shit demon?
Yeah, I don't get poop jokes, man.
Oh.
Poop jokes are just lame. Like, I've never, even as a kid, I was just like, we're doing this? This is it? Yeah, it's just, I've never found them funny. I'm always just like, this is just gross and unnecessary. So yeah, that was the one part of the film where I was like, I knew about it because everyone talked about it. I was just like, you could cut this out and the movie would be better paced for it. It's just fully killing time.
Yeah, but it's a poop joke that ends with knocks out strong odors, and then it knocks out the poop demon.
Yeah,
I really like that.
I don't know what to tell you, man. That's the one that didn't hit for me. I'm not sorry to say.
I like the poop demon. Steve, you don't like the poop demon?
I thought Kevin Smith knocking him out was kind of funny. I think I just am so grossed out at the concept of poop that a poop demon is just terrifying to me, and I didn't even register it as a joke. I thought it was a legitimate threat.
Steve's gonna have nightmares about poop demons.
I mean, I legitimately am, man. Like, could you imagine just that much shit walking towards you? That's a lot of shit. That was like 200 pounds of shit.
It's a lot of shit.
Yeah, man, that's like those dumped landfills in India that are just filled with elephant shit because there's nowhere else for them to shit, and they just pick that one spot, and it just turns into a fucking mountain of shit.
Man.
Yeah, man.
Sounds like my ex-girlfriend. Yeah, I don't know. I like the poop demon. I thought it looked pretty good when it, like, the shot of its leg when it slams down and then it's just like the oozy poop. Oh, I like that shot. And it's just it's coming and it's creepy and weird, and then it's all a gag. I thought that was pretty good. I liked it a lot.
And it does, I think, go to the broader point of just like Kevin Smith's like style of humor it's in a very specific bucket, but he kind of plays every angle of it. So like you'll have like just the Family Guy level dick and fart jokes, and then you'll have like more sort of subversive and clever jokes that are essentially the same content but are written really well. And I think he's maybe gotten to this point where like he can do everything from literal shit demon to some sort of like quip about odors all in the same scene. And that's entertaining to me. I feel like the dude's funny. I don't particularly like would go out of my way to watch a Kevin Smith comedy, but I think he'd be fun to talk to and I would have a good time.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. What do you guys think of the inclusion of Jay and Silent Bob in this one?
That's always cute to me. That's something I feel like I'd do. Like, I would want, like, if I was making movies, like, all of us would be in every single one in some capacity. Like, why wouldn't you? That's just so fun. Like, obviously in the mixy suit as well, but, like, make it canon. But, like, I love shit like that. That's always cute to me. I think as well they serve a good role in this. It's like, you need the kind of the passers-by who are fully indifferent to everything that's going on completely, just to keep it grounded as we get to more esoteric territory. And again, I think Muse is funny that we've got this point where Kevin Smith just has this really weird, crazy friend who he just includes because I'm just set the camera on, I'm just watch him talk, and none of it is scripted. It's just entirely this dude just going off. Well, I think that's really funny, and they somehow make it work. So, I like the idea of like Kevin Smith's Silent Bob as a character. I think is a really smart idea of how to get the director in the film without it feeling like a like ego thing, without it feeling like it's just there to like, oh, he has to be on camera. It's by making him specifically never talk. I think is a nice way of just really emphasizing that this is just a fun thing to do. This is just purely kind of, hey, we can do this, so let's do it and have fun. So no, I enjoyed those two in this. I thought they were one of the better parts of the film in terms of getting me to laugh more and more. So I definitely thought it was a great positive.
I just think their inclusion is interesting because, so the filmography to this point was Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Dogma. Clerks, of course, was the breakout success. Mallrats was like he's always described it as his attempt to do a studio comedy, and it's his film that he looks back on and like kind of hates. It's his episode 1 of Dragon Ball DC for you, Alfie. Like he does not like Mallrats. Chasing Amy is the thing he always touts as like the best thing he's ever written, and it's his proof that he knows how to do dialogue, and it was the thing that got him to almost write that Superman movie with Nick Cage. And the interesting, and then you get Dogma, of course, which has Jane Silent Bob in it, and they're in all 4 of those movies. But the interesting thing is, they're barely in Chasing Amy. They get one scene where they show up in Chasing Amy. And it's a pretty long scene. It's the most Silent Bob has ever talked in a movie. And then they just kind of go, and a lot of people, like, to this day, do not like Chasing Amy because of the lack of Jay and Silent Bob, which is really funny. Because they 100% fit that movie better than they do Dogma, in a weird way. Like they're perfectly fine in it, but it definitely does not need to be Jay and Silent Bob. But it's just weird because like literally, just a couple weeks ago, I was at work, and we're talking to one of the guys who had just seen Clerks and was like, okay, so what do I watch next? And we're like, oh, Mallrats, then Chasing Amy, then Dogma. And one of the guys pipes up and goes, just skip Chasing Amy, go straight to Dogma. It's not worth it. I'm like, what? No, that's the best one. And it's very different, but it's weird because it seemed like Chasing Amy, it seemed like he was trying to kind of put those characters away a little bit. Like, still have them be part of the universe, but not, like, have them be such a presence in the movies. And then in Dogma, they come back in a big way, and then after Dogma, they get their own movie, which is interesting. And that was the one he was like the most reluctant to make. It's like, oh, really? The fucking stoner fart joke guys? That you want a whole movie just about them? Yes! And I gotta thank him because that was the first Kevin Smith movie I ever watched, and it's still my absolute favorite of his. So it's just funny to see Jay and Silent Bob in here where they fit this material probably the least, and that's probably why I like them so much in this, is they're just so, like, gung-ho and go-to about all of it. It's great. And Jason Mewes is an absolute treasure, and I'll quote him, like, Jason Mewes is hilarious, and I'll quote everything he says, because just, goddamn, the so will you fuck me? No, I will not fuck you. What if it's like an end of the world scenario, like a bomb's about to go off or something, and we only have a couple minutes left to live? Will you fuck me then? In that highly unlikely scenario, sure, I'll fuck you. God, that is such a good go-to now. That is so... I've stolen that at least 3 times in the last week.
Jason Mewes is absolutely like the Earth 25... Ian, who everything went bad and like life was completely derailed and stuff, but there's still that inherent fucking wit is still coming through the madness. That is there's some kind of multiversal connection there, without a doubt.
Or Jason Mewes was a very influential person on my style of comedy.
The Injustice Ian is what I'm going with. But if you want to have your goddamn stupid headcanon, about we influenced your comedy, unrealistic in my opinion. But My take in Justice Ian is what's canon.
You gotta give Kevin Smith a little bit of credit where he progressively trailed upwards into Chasing Amy, which made almost 10 times its budget, because its budget was like 100,000 or 200,000, something like that, and it made like several $1,000,000. And instead of using that Hollywood clout to make some sort of like artsy studio movie, he went right back down and made a movie about religion with a shit monster with his high school friends and some big actors. Like that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't particularly like any of those movies, but like, respect.
I'm surprised you don't like Chasing Amy more.
That's the thing is I'm surprised I don't like Chasing Amy. But like I watched Chasing Amy and I'm just like this feels like the kind of movie I would have made if I was in high school and I didn't understand like the more complicated relationship dynamics of the world. It just reads that way to me, where it just reads kind of like almost mean-spirited, but not intentionally. But then on the flip side, you watch Jersey Girl, and Jersey Girl legitimately feels like a mature coming-of-age romantic comedy. Like, I wish Jersey Girl had Chasing Amy's reputation, because Jersey Girl is absolutely his best film, and is absolutely more of like his attempt to do like a prestige, serious romantic drama.
I just think Jersey Girl would be so much better if you just put Jay and Silent Bob in it.
No, that's exactly why it's so good. And he still has his shits and giggles. George Carlin's still in there, and he's still funny. And like, there are still like dick and fart jokes and shit. But like, Jersey Girl is like legit a pretty good movie.
I just think that like, I think it would have been better if he kept them in every movie, because it's like, it was one thing where he's like, okay, I'm moving away from that like universe of things. I'm not going to do it. And so here's Jersey Girl, my first movie without it. And Jersey Girl was like, I believe, both a critical and financial failure. And so the next thing he does is about like 3 years later, he does Clerks 2. So it's kind of funny. It worked out that way. And Clerks 2, very, very good film. And it's just, I don't know. I guess it hits in a particular way. Maybe you're trying too hard to get away from it, Steve. Maybe you need to embrace it more. I don't know.
Maybe I need to go back through. But again, my fear is Kevin Smith movies are for a very specific sort of like coming of age perspective. Like they're very interesting and very good movies to hand your awkward teenage self to kind of bring you out of your shell and start thinking about things in a more interesting way, and kind of like. They're good stepping stone films in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that.
But if you miss the stepping stone, or you stepped on some other stone, I don't think you can ever entirely go back and not have at least somewhat of a distance from what they're trying to do. Like, I think I've accepted the fact at this point that Buffy and Angel are like this too, where I just can't show it to people. The older you get, and the further away you are from your teen drama life, the less I can explain to you and you understand why Angel and Buffy are so good. And I think Kevin Smith's the same thing, where like, the older I get, the less likely it is that I will appreciate any of these movies more.
I think that's totally fair. I honestly do. It's weird because it's movies about like guys in it's movies starring guys in their 20s, early 30s, talking about these things that like they'd been thinking about since high school. And they had the idea in high school, but they didn't know how to put it in words until they're in their 20s. And then when they figure that part out, then they've kind of got it. They've got something to work with. They start going.
And I think that's great, right? Like I think we have a real sort of deficit in Hollywood proper right now of like younger directors being able to do shit like this. Like in the 90s, it was all over the place. Like if it wasn't Kevin Smith or Joss Whedon, like there were other people you could go to that were trying to do this kind of thing. And I feel like we don't have as many sort of mediums that tout the younger people who are trying to create coming of age stories in this sort of like hyper low budget, one person against the studio system kind of way. So I appreciate that role that they play. And it would be really interesting to get a perspective on someone who is like in their 20 or who are in like their mid-teens now, being exposed to a Kevin Smith movie and seeing if it registers to them on the same level.
I think it would. I will say though, I think like Clerks 2 is really the only one that has the time to do this, because like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, it's got like a couple more heartfelt moments, but it's more just like this like at the time last hurrah, like goodbye love letter, let's just have some fun kind of movie for that universe. And then Clerks 2 is, it's only like 4 or 5 years later, but it's like it's a long 4 or 5 years if you get my feel. And that's the one that is most about like just the like the thing is Clerks 2 opens with Dante going to the quick stop to open it up for the morning, and it's on fire, and he's like, fuck, what do I do? And is scared. And then it just kind of follows that who moved from one dead-end job to the other, and then like he was not living authentically, as Sartre would say. He was not living. He was living under bad faith and making decisions in bad faith. And then like it ends in like this kind of bittersweet but really really impactful way, where Dante and Randall fucking buy the quick stop and rebuild it, and just decide that's going to be their lives. They're going to work there till they die, but now they're not going to be working for anyone else. They're going to be working for themselves. And I think that's such like that isn't something you could have made and been happy about as a teenager. And I feel like it's kind of Kevin Smith commenting on his own filmography there of like, well, I tried doing other stuff and it worked out to some degree, or it didn't. But like, maybe I do just kind of have to be happy with this thing that I've got, and make the best of it, and not get trapped into the idea of, well, I've got to abandon this thing that made me successful and move on and make something else successful. I don't know, there's some really interesting themes and stuff that are played with in those, and Dogma is kind of that middle stepping stone, because this feels like it was before Clerks 2. This feels like it was meant to be kind of the end of this universe in anything serious that it had to say. And it feels like his last big hurrah there. And there's, again, I think a lot of stuff in here is really good. Not just the points that are made, but I like a lot of the acting. I like the mythology that he creates. I think he creates a pretty goddamn compelling and interesting mythology with what he's playing with in Catholic Dogma here. I think that's fun. And I just enjoy the film. It's funny that it's so controversial, or it was at the time. There's this really famous story about how he was, like the movie was going to be released in theaters, and his friend called him up to tell him about the fact that there are people protesting it, and he's like, oh cool, let's go join the protest. And they made like really good protest signs that said stuff like Dogma is dog shit, and then they went to go join the protesters on the like movie theater lawns and protest the movie. And then fucking local news came up and interviewed him. They're like, are you here for something else? He's like, no, I'm just here to talk about how I think this is a bad movie and it's saying a lot of bad things about our Catholic faith. And it's just really fucking funny story to me. Oh, I like that energy, man. That's some good quality energy. That's some shit Alfie and I would do.
Of the 3 movies discussed on Jesus and His Amazing Friends month so far, all 3 have been met with quite a bit of controversy by Christians for various reasons. Which one of these 3 do you think deserved it the most?
Last Temptation, without a doubt.
Yeah, probably Last Temptation, because that movie opens up just in bad faith, in my opinion.
That's fair. Yeah. Jesus complicit in murdering people is not a good look.
Yeah, like that's a bit. Again, we talked about that at the beginning of the last read. That's a bridge too far.
I think really... even without that, I think that's the only one that's actually trying to engage in the argument. So it's like Dogma's not trying to, like, it's got some points, but it makes it very clear early on, like, hey, don't, like, in that very Kevin Smith way of like, hey, I don't know what I'm fucking talking about, make your own opinion kind of, like, it's not trying to portray itself as an authority or anything. The trappings of Jesus Christ Superstar inherently aren't necessarily trying to talk about religion itself. It's more so just like a celebration and an artistic take, but it's not necessarily here to sit down and debate with anyone. It's not here to be discussed over kind of thing. Whereas Martin Scorsese, I think, is very pointedly, and the author of the book is very pointedly trying to start like debate me, like the Twitter thread, you know, like it's I think that's a different. It's the same reason for why I think more people take issue with like the even though take issue, but like there's more of an argument around stuff like BVS and Man of Steel than there was like say Superman Returns. Because Man of Steel and BVS are more so trying to directly challenge people, whereas Superman Returns is kind of in its own lane, you know. Despite, again, it doesn't matter what you think this was, just the intent of the author is very different in these cases, and I think that's the same. Temptation is the only one that I think is trying to engage in that at all.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's interesting because I see that case for sure. I feel like I would be most sympathetic to Christian people not liking Dogma, only because I feel like with the other two movies, it feels like the things that were being complained about, as opposed to the things that should be complained about, but the things that were being complained about are very petty, low-hanging fruit in the grand scheme of things to talk about in Christianity, you know? Like, it seems like the things that people of Christian faith were upset about were not things that you need be upset about in the first place. And I think Dogma is almost the opposite, where it's like the things it's poking at religion, if I was a religious person, I would interpret as you're just kind of picking the low-hanging fruit of our religion and it's not necessarily worth engaging in.
How so?
Like I feel like the criticism it's making of the Catholic Church and the jokes it makes about how they refused to take a side during the Holocaust, the opening scene with Matt Damon basically just being a new atheist, all the stuff about like the Bible is deeply sexist against women, and like it feels like if I showed this movie to someone who was deeply religious, I think the very easy rebuttal will be like, these are all things that have been stated ad nauseum online by people for years, and it's just not an interesting conversation from their perspective to have.
Maybe, but I think you got to take it in context of when it came out. 1999, internet atheism culture wasn't really the thing it is now. You know?
Yeah, but insofar as I can't like attest to 1999, just saying in terms of these three movies today, which ones deserve controversy around them, I could see more of an argument for this than I can the other two.
I think
I don't know.
for your question, because I think you're raising like a very good point here, and I think it has a different answer depending on what you specifically mean for your question, right? So I'm going to propose you this: are you talking about what actually would annoy like the typical image of like build up the stereotype, right, of the religious believer, like the redneck Republican, like Christian, kind of fully like the full stereotype, not real person, but also sadly real people that exist, right? And like the Bible Belt, like these people, what would they get more offended about? If that's what you're talking about, then I think you're right. I do think that is Dogma, Suicide Superstar. There is more of like they're trying to make a joke of it, and that's what annoys them. But if you're talking about like an actually deeply religious people, who understand the Bible, understand the things, because the kind of like Roger Ebert in like his review about Last Temptation of Christ like talked about this, like he read an essay from a pastor who went into Last Temptation of Christ, and the argument they made is a deeply religious person would look at something like Jesus Christ Superstar or Dogma, and for whatever reason, kind of like disregard it. It's just like the same way like they wouldn't get angry at the little kid. Like obviously insane people do this, but like a sane religious person wouldn't get angry at a little kid who's in like class who says like an anti-religious like joke or something, right? They wouldn't. It's not something that makes them fuming, seemingly angry, because it's just something you can disregard. It's like, oh, they don't know what the fuck you're talking about, kind of thing. The thing that temptation does is, and in this quote, it's like you only know how to break something if you understand it. No one can really piss off a Catholic in the proper way unless you're like a really deeply versed Catholic. And I think Kevin Smith grew up in that environment, but he isn't as like deep. It's a much more casual relationship than Scorsese had with it, where he's very pointedly trying to do something to get a reaction. It's like the person who's doing this to do the fact of like Jesus has to have a sex with a woman on screen or building crosses. This is not something the general person on the street trying to get a reaction would do. It has to be someone who understands the text deeply, and therefore, for an actual religious person, it's more offensive because it's got more kind of weight to it. It's the difference between a generic argument of someone calling you an asshole versus someone making a very pointed personal comment. You know?
Yeah. Because, and it's interesting you phrase it like that way, because I think you're right. Scorsese is definitely way more pointedly Catholic. He's made way more religious films than Kevin Smith has. But it does seem like, at least to me, that more of Dogma is trying to elicit a rise out of people than anything Scorsese's done. And you're right. If you talk about like the Bible Belty people, you show them Last Temptation of Christ, and the kind of stereotypical Southern rednecky people would not understand their own religion enough to understand what about that movie is troubling in the first place, versus something like Dogma, where they just watch that and they would think of it as just a straight up joke about the religion. Even you give them Jesus Christ Superstar, and they would just take it as on face value of this is just a really, really fun, energetic performance of the Bible. Versus someone who is more sort of like keenly aware of their religion, and they're trying to watch these things from the perspective of how they understand that religious framework. And there would be things about Last Temptation of Christ that feel more unsettling in that framework than, say, something like Dogma. Yeah, I agree with that. At the same time, though, I still would say that Dogma, it's not the kind of movie that I think is making particularly insightful jabs at religion in a way that can't be hand-waved away by a religious person. Like, I think the things about religion it's saying are interesting on a certain level, but I also feel like if I gave these same criticisms to someone who knows that their Bible back and forth, they would very quickly just assume I'm not giving them a serious argument or a serious discussion.
No, I think that's fair, and that's the thing is, Kevin Smith doesn't sell this movie or doesn't talk about this movie as if it's some, radical takedown of religion. He talks about it as, and I think it's the best interpreted as, this is just his thoughts on religion, getting it out there. And I think that's fair. It's like, it's not a serious intellectual argument. It's just a guy kind of giving where he'd come to terms with at the time, at least. And I don't know if all of the criticisms in this are low-hanging fruit. I think some of this is genuinely informative because of how history is taught in the American school system. I didn't know that the Catholic Church had kind of a hands-off approach to the Holocaust until I watched this movie as a teenager. So there's that. And then, like, the Bible always paints women as the villain thing. I don't know if that's, like, a very strong point, but it is something that I've heard said before, and it's worth at least considering if the Bible has contributed to, what's the word I want here? Innate sexism in popular culture. And I think that's kind of just the point. Is like, the funny thing is, he throws out about 1 billion points a minute in some of these conversations, so it's hard to tell what's meant to be like a serious, this is what this conversation is about, what's meant to be a joke, and what's meant to be, well, here's like a thing that, hey, think about this, in context of a wider point. So, I don't know. I think the best philosophical thing that comes out of this is just the Chris Rock character argument, where he just talks about, like, it's hard to change a faith. It's easy to change and let ideas evolve. I like that. I think that's probably the best argument the movie makes, and I think that functions very well within it. So I do enjoy that part. Alright, one of the last things I want to talk about is Alanis Morissette. What casting for God?
That was really... I forgot she was God at the end of this.
That's such a, like, it never has a movie felt more 90s than the scene in which Alanis Morissette played God and did quirky girl shit in the background.
Yeah, that is indeed something. I wish that Reaper... I don't know if you guys ever watched Reaper, but that was an old CW show that Kevin Smith produced that only lasted like a season, maybe a season and a half. But he has some interview somewhere where he's like, he wished he got further enough in that show so that he could get her back as God in that. And I always thought that would be really, really fucking funny. I entirely forgot that the reason he planned on that is because he already cast her as God in this movie.
That's hilarious. I didn't know about that. That's pretty good. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very 90s moment, and I liked it.
Yeah, I thought well. I very much like the nose boot. And I like the interpretation as well. I like the thing of like God's true voice is like just this very Lovecraftian idea. Is that you just can't physically speak to them because it's just too powerful and too overwhelming and too annoying. But simultaneously, they can come down and do some games on the side when they want to chill out. So I like that. I think that's cute. It's very.
God's a skee ball fan.
yeah, very much. I feel that I enjoy that. I enjoy takes on that with all powerful entities, but there's like a casualness to them. I always think that's like a really great way of showing power beyond belief, where there is no kind of like flinching or stancing or anything. They're just completely pure confidence, because that's how you know this person could never understand, who's never felt fear or pain or thing, because they just are freely able to move. I think that's always a really very subtle, very often thing, but like the default for like a very strong character is to have them stance up or have them like always posed and something. So I always much appreciate, like, you want to show true power, you have like a Beerus type figure of someone who absolutely knows they can do whatever the fuck. They're just kind of bored by it and just kind of lazying about. I always appreciate that. I think it's always fun.
There's cool stuff like that in this that I enjoy.
And on that as well, I do think something I think this film would be better served by, because I think when it does it really well, is I think the acts of like angels and the use of like powers and supernatural stuff, and I think this film does that a lot better and sells it a lot more impressively when it's done by editing tricks. Like the scene where we're in the room and then we immediately switch to the restaurant, when God like comes through the doors and like the light from behind it, and like I think that works a lot better to portraying divinity and like really great power on like without needing much practical effects than the literal angel wings and the flying,
which are kind of like they kind of shake when the actors move
it's just
in
it doesn't.
stuff.
It's something where like you didn't need to show. Imagine how like more crazy that would have been if we just cut away and then we see just the string of bodies on the floor, and then we just have the
I think it would have been
kind of thing.
I think it would have been fine if you just saved it for like Bartleby at the end. I think that would be fine. I think you see it too much in beforehand, and that's what kind of wrecks it.
Yeah, even then,
because I was literally about to talk about that.
I think there's, again, maybe if you only had to do the one time, you could put more money into that specific one time. So maybe you're right. Maybe that would solve the problem. But it is something where I was impressed by the choice, and I think that's always a much cooler way of doing it on film. where you use the literal tool of God, which is the editor, who is the god of that reality. I think is always
Oh
much more
God,
impressive.
he always does this. He gets so into it. I'm like, it's literally just a cut. You don't have it. It's not that deep, bro.
Plays today.
Everything is not a painting, okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a sketch.
You guys, this is why you're not men of vision.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Jeez, that's like the coldest insult I think Alfie's ever given. Shit.
Actually,
All right.
Glasses.
Yeah, no, like Alfie, I'm kicking you off, geeky gentleman. You're gonna have to go on a training arc to get back.
Damn it. Me and my hubris. I'm the Lucifer Morningstar of Geeky Gentleman now.
I'm sure there's other stuff I wanted to talk about with this, but I'm having trouble recalling it at the moment, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up unless anyone has anything else they really, really wanted to get out there.
I just want to double down on Ben Affleck is really good in this, and I wish more people would watch movies from his earlier days, because I feel like he legitimately had some range and talent that just got swept away in the Hollywood machine over the years.
That's fair. That's fair. He's in Mallrats, so you can go rewatch Mallrats, Steve.
Yes, and I mean he's my window into Kevin Smith movies. Is like the reason I watch them is because I like watching Ben Affleck and stuff. And I'll never forgive the Warner Brothers for ruining Live by Night by making him do Justice League reshoots.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry, Steve. I'm sorry for your troubles. I didn't realize that Kevin Smith and Ben Affleck had a falling out. Was it? I'm assuming it was after he was cast as Batman. It was probably because he was cast as Batman at Kevin Smith's behest.
To be honest, I feel like they had a falling out like way before that.
It was.
Yeah, I remember. Okay. Basically, there was a thing after he got cast where someone asked him in an interview, like, "Hey, you and Ben Affleck aren't friends anymore. Did you call him or anything about him being cast as Batman?" And he said something about like either attempting to or like having like a very sort of like pleasant conversation with him or something about that. But apparently they have not been friends in like 10 years or something. Like it's been a long, long time.
Well, I mean, they're friends again now.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, because Ben Affleck's been on Fatman and Batman, and Kevin Smith's talked about is they've reconnected because Ben Affleck was the one who reached out himself, and they're going to do something together again. So they've whatever it was they've solved. And again, it didn't even seem like it was a fallout. It more so felt like kind of a just general drifting apart once they stopped making movies together, kind of thing. And obviously Ben Affleck, just the Hollywood machine, just like you said, Steve, just spat him out and kind of drove him through all of that, and still kind of doing that. So I think it was just a general kind of like something might have happened, and then they just didn't keep contact. Batman thing happened, that passed, but now they just this year they seem to have patched it up and back on working together.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I from what I remember, he was one of the people that first interviewed him about playing Batman. When that news dropped, so I was a little surprised to hear that it was before that.
Real quick before we go, do you know the story about Bruce Willis and Kevin Smith reconnecting post Cop Out because they had a big fight on set about that?
No.
Oh, okay, because this is really funny. I just heard this on a podcast the other day when I was listening to Ed Brubaker talk, but essentially, Cop Out came out in the mid 2000s, like 2012 or something, and it's pretty infamous that like Bruce Willis and Kevin Smith did not get along, and Kevin Smith talked about how unprofessional Bruce Willis was, and Bruce Willis talked about how Kevin Smith like doesn't know how to make a movie, yada yada yada. Well, apparently, like years later, Kevin Smith got like a call from Bruce Willis just asking him like, "Hey Kevin, how are you doing?" They just kind of like shot the shit for a little while. And they would keep up like that for a little while, and then one day he got a text from him, and he's like, "Oh hey, I have these pictures of you and Rose that I'm going to send over." And so he sends them over, and Kevin Smith's like, I don't know anyone named Rose. I don't know what's going on here. And then eventually it turned out Bruce Willis called him back. He's like, "Oh, this is Kevin Smith. I had the wrong Kevin on my phone." And so like he's just carried on this relationship with Bruce Willis, despite being the wrong Kevin after they had their falling out, and it's just really funny to me.
That's amusing as fuck. Kevin Smith has such good stories, man. Fucking, like, he doesn't need to make movies anymore, because just being in Hollywood and making movies and shit, he's gained so many fucking weird stories that it's so good.
I know, it's really fucking funny. He also, and this is great, he told Ed Brubaker that he needs to write his autobiography and title it Bitter About Bucky. Like, that's the greatest title I've ever heard.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. Alright, well, let's go ahead and go on to ratings for Dogma. I'll go first so I can be disappointed, and I'll say Dogma gets a 4 out of 5 shit demons.
I will give Dogma 3 out of 5 dickless angels.
For me, I'll also match Mr. Baxi and give it 3 out of 5 naked people falling from the sky.
There you go. Big titty women don't just fall out of the sky, you know?
Yeah, that was a really good line.
He didn't miss a beat, he just went for it.
Like you wouldn't, man. Like, how many chances do you get?
How quick you come up with that.
It's such a good line, man. Alright, and what are we going to be talking about next time, Steve?
Alright, so next time, we're going to talk about the 2.5-hour biblical epic by Darren Aronofsky, Noah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm excited. I haven't seen that movie since it came out.
Yeah. Anthony Hopkins, Russell Crowe.
Emma Watson.
Yeah, Emma Watson. Fucking... Dude, Anthony Hopkins has been in so many fucking movies the last 10 years. It's ridiculous. Anyway. Yep, sounds good. Until next time, everyone, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the champion of the oppressed.
I am the exile from heaven.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.